I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings
Let
would
me
be
ask,
much better.
if I may
Okay,
ask
that's
one other
enough.
question, Mr. President, if I may ask
Peter,
one
go
other
ahead.
question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President, I
That's
was going
enough.
to ask one of the other folks. have
That's
had-
enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse
President,
me. That's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other
Peter,
question,
let's
if
go.
I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have
I'm not concerned
indictments-
about anything with
that you
the
may have
Russian
indictments coming down?
investigation because it's a hoax.
Are you-
That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to challenge you on one of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign in the midterms. That
Here we go.
If you don't mind,
Let's
Mr.
go.
President,
Come on.
that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr.
I
President,
consider it to be an
As you know,
invasion.
Mr. President, the caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate it.
Why did you characterize it as such?
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in
Not
this
at all.
election
No, not
to
at all.
try to keep?
I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. You know, they have to come in, Jim, through a process. I want it to be a process, and I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your
You know,
campaign.
Wait. You know why we need the people, don't you? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people.
But your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and
Well,
so
that's
on.
true.
But
They weren't actors.
They're not going to be doing that.
They weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood.
Right.
These were people. This was an actual. You know, it happened a few days ago, and
They're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of
you know
miles
what?
away. That's
I
not
think
an
you
invasion.
should, honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN,
All right.
and if you did it well, your ratings
Let
would
me
be
ask,
much better.
if I may
Okay,
ask
that's
one other
enough.
question, Mr. President. If I may ask
Peter,
one
go
other
ahead.
question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's
Mr.
enough.
President,
That's
I was
enough.
going to ask one of the other folks. have
That's
had-
enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse
President,
me. That's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other
Peter,
question,
let's
if
go.
I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have?
I'm not concerned
indictments-
about anything with
that you
the
may have
Russian
indictments coming down?
investigation because it's a hoax.
Are you-
That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
I think that's unfair.
You're a
I've
very
worked-
rude person. The way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible. You shouldn't treat people that way. Go ahead. Go ahead, Peter, go ahead.
In Jim's defense, I've traveled with him and watched him. He's a diligent reporter who busts
Well,
his
I'm
butt
not a
like the
big
rest
fan
of
of
us.
yours either, so
I understand.
to be honest
So
with
so let me ask you a question if I can. You repeatedly
you.
said,
You aren't the best.
Mr. President, you repeatedly, over the course
Okay,
of the...
just sit down, please. Well, when you report fake news, when you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
Mr. President, over the course of the last several days of the campaign, sir, at the end of the campaign, you repeatedly said that Americans need to fear Democrats. You said Democrats would unleash a wave of violent crime that endangers families everywhere. Why are you
Because they're
pitting
very weak on
Americans?
crime.
Why are
Excuse
you
me.
pitting Americans
Peter.
against one another, sir?
Peter, what are you trying to be him?
No, I'm
Peter,
just asking the question.
Let me just tell you, very simple. Because they're very weak on crime. Because they have often suggested, members and people within the Democrat Party at a high level have suggested getting rid of ICE, getting rid of law enforcement. That's not going to happen, okay? We want to be strong on the borders. We want to be strong on law enforcement, and I want to cherish ICE because ICE does a fantastic job. What they do for us is it's so unrecognized how good a job they do. So we want to take care of them, and we want to hold them very close because they do a good job.
But the question,
Okay,
to be clear, though, the question,
Thank you
sir,
very
is
much.
why are you
sit down?
But but you didn't answer my question. Just very simply, the question is, why are you pitting Americans against one another, sir?
I'm not.
Is that how you view
No, I'm not.
citizens
well,
of
look,
this country?
I'll tell you what. We won a lot of elections last night. We did very well last night.
But in many ways,
I think
it divided the
have.
country.
I think it's going to have a very positive impact. I watched NBC this morning. They didn't report it exactly correctly, but that's that's the fact with NBC. Nothing I can do about that. But I want this country to have protection. We want security in our country. I want security, Peter. I mean, you maybe don't think it's so important. And I think when you don't have it, you are indeed unleashing crime. I feel that.
You said you would sign an executive order on birthright citizenship. Are you still going to sign the executive order on birthright citizenship?
You'll
this
ask
week?
me that question a little bit later. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, sure.
Thank you, Mr. President. The investigation by the special counsel Robert Mueller has been going on since last spring. It's been over your head.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been over your head, over Republicans' head, during the midterms as well. Is this an opportunity for you, Mr. President, to end that investigation? Would you consider removing Mr. Mueller from his position?
I could have ended it any time I wanted. I didn't. And there was no collusion. There was no anything. I didn't. They went after hackers in Moscow. I don't know about that. They went after people with tax problems from years ago. They went after people with loans and other things. Had nothing to do with my campaign. This is a investigation where many, many millions of dollars has been spent, and there's no collusion. It was supposed to be on collusion. There's no collusion, and I think it's very bad for our country. I will tell you. I think it's a shame. And a poll came out today, by the way, from NBC, or at least I saw it on NBC, where a majority of the people do not agree with the Mueller investigation, or it wasn't approved. They have approval and disapproval, and it had a much higher disapproval. It should end, because it's very bad for our country.
So if it's bad...
And I'm not just talking about the tremendous expense. And the other thing is they should look at the other side also. They only look at one side. They're not looking at all of the things that came up during this investigation. They don't do that. They should also get people that can be fair, not 13 or 14 or 17. I call them the angry Democrats. They are angry people. And it's a very unfair thing for this country. It's a very, very, forget about unfair to me, it's very bad for our country.
Okay. So, Mr. President, if it's
Go ahead.
Mr.
No,
President,
no.
just wait,
Please.
just a moment. If it's unfair to the country and it's costing millions of dollars, why don't you just
give him the
end
mic,
it?
please? I've answered the question. Okay. Go ahead, take the. Well, I'll give you voters. I will give you voter suppression. You just have to sit down, please. Sit down. I didn't call you. I didn't call you. I didn't call you. I'll give you voter suppression. Take a look at the CNN polls, how inaccurate they were. That's called voter suppression. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I'm not responding. I'm responding to. Excuse me. I'm not responding to you. I'm talking to this gentleman. Will you please sit down? Excuse me. Would you please sit down? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now that the House of
Very
Representatives
hostile.
has fled,
It's such a hostile media. It's so sad. You ask me about. No, you rudely interrupted him. You rudely interrupted him. Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. President. Do your demands remain the same to the United States Congress on immigration in exchange for a DACA fix, in exchange for an amnesty for 1.7 million? Are you willing to change any of those demands that you gave to Congress earlier?
I think we could really do something having to do with DACA. And what really happened with DACA, we could have done some pretty good work on DACA, but a judge ruled that DACA was okay. Had the judge not ruled that way, I think we would have made a deal. Once the judge ruled that way, the Democrats didn't want to talk anymore. So we'll see how it works out at the Supreme Court.